Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for attending our 5th webinar in this series. I know your time is valuable, so I hope you get a lot out of this today. My name's Danny McShane. I'm the Business Development Director for Tellemachus. I help businesses solve problems using technology. But for a while now, GDPR has been the topic on everyone's minds, and this series of webinars is designed to help organisations prepare for GDPR, and we're joined today by a speaker who will showcase data loss prevention technologies. A spot of housekeeping first: we've muted all attendees. If anyone does have a question, please type it into the text box as we go, and I'll put the questions to Stuart at the end. This is the 5th webinar in the series, so for those of you that haven't seen the previous ones, they are available online. If anyone would like the links sent into them, my contact details will be available at the end of the session, so please just get in touch. But briefly, before I bring Stuart in to introduce himself properly, let me very quickly recap on what we went over in the previous webinars. There are lots of aspects that need to be considered when looking at GDPR. These cover people, processes, and technology. So it's something that should be assessed at a level with authority over all three. In most organisations, this is usually a board level. Technology is available to assist with all aspects of data protection and data loss prevention. The question that organisations will have to answer is, as a business that chooses to store data electronically, should you adopt these new technologies to help you secure your data? And we went through the 5 essential steps. Most importantly, if you haven't already, get started now. May 2018 is fast approaching. This is the biggest shake-up to data protection in 20 years. Second is create a data loss response plan, and we went through the ways in which that can be done and the benefits that it can bring to an organisation in responsible data management. Thirdly, to locate and classify all of your data in order to fully understand the risk and to enable effective policies to be put in place regarding the protection of that data. Once the location of the data is known and controlled, the next step is about managing who can access that data and who shouldn't access that data, and being able to proactively police the access to the data. And the last one, which a lot of people think is silly, but delete the data. If that data is not adding value to your business, if it isn't delivering a business benefit, delete the data. This webinar will highlight the protection that data loss prevention technologies can offer organisations. And with that, let me hand you over to Stuart Cook.
Good afternoon. Thanks for that, Danny. Okay, so without further ado, we'll pretty kind of go over the digital guardian technology, if you like, and how our agent, if you like, operates on the endpoint within itself. So we base ourselves mainly around the fact of visibility, and our agent operates on the endpoint down at the kernel layer, and that gives us, if you like, the ability to see everything that goes on. And that's very important, because if you can't actually see everything that's going on the endpoint in itself, then you're very much making guesswork around arranging your policies and that in order to try and hit or to try and stop and block things that are going on that endpoint. Unless you can actually see them happening, then realistically you're just making guesswork about trying to control where data is going. On top of that as well, you get the ability then to understand exactly how your users are interacting with that data. And more importantly from that, while it's very good to see everything that's going on there and prove that something's happening, it's obviously quite difficult to prove something that isn't happening on an endpoint. And the only way you can do that is when you have the visibility of seeing everything that goes on. And based around having that visibility and that understanding allows you then to respond and create your policies and your controls around those facts, if you like. So briefly to go over to the endpoint agent, we've briefly mentioned the fact that it operates down at the kernel layer, and that's important because that allows us to see every system, every user, network, and data event that goes on that at that layer. And because we have the ability to see that going on, that then allows us to start putting in some kind of contextual controls around what's happening on there. It doesn't matter whether the data is structured or unstructured. It doesn't matter who the users are, where the data is coming from, where it's going to, but it allows us to apply elements of intelligence around what's really going on based upon that visibility. We can also do things like trending analysis. So an example of that is we have the ability to baseline, if you like, normal users' interactions with data on a day-to-day basis. For example, if a user normally prints out 10 documents a day and then one day prints out 100 documents, that would be an anomaly, and we would be able to alert on that behavior that's outside of the norm. It may well have a very good reason as to why that's happening, but where we have the ability to alert, if you like, based around that. And then based upon that intelligence and that visibility, that then allows us to start putting some protective measures around what's going on with the data within itself. We can block it and stop it from leaving the organization. We can put a pop-up up to inform a user that they're about to send sensitive information outside of the organization. If data is put over onto a USB drive, for example, we can transparently encrypt it when it's put on over onto that USB drive. That can be transparently decrypted when plugged into any other machine within the solution set, and also if it's plugged into another machine outside of the organization, we have the ability to input a password using a little app in order to decrypt it from that perspective. Also, what's important to note there as well is because we're logging and we're recording everything that's going on, we also have the ability to prove exactly what is on that USB drive should it be lost, for example. So the proving what didn't or didn't happen, very important there. And all those logs then are fed up to our DGMC, or our Digital Guardian Management Console, and that gives us the ability then to report on what has and hasn't happened on there. All the logs are digitally signed, sent over an encrypted link. It's important to note as well that the agent itself is pretty much autonomous to itself. It doesn't need any kind of heartbeat or any mechanism from that perspective. It's pre-configured to upload its logs at a set period of time, which is completely configurable by the end users or the administrator of the solution rather. But out of the box, it's sort of every 15 minutes. It's also important to note is that we never actually take any data off of the endpoint. So that obviously increases your risk if copies of data and that are forwarded up to a central solution in order to prove things that have happened. All we take off is metadata of the who, what, why, when, and where aspects of it. So a very big, selling point of our solution is, you can't control what you can't see. If you can't see what's going on, then you can't put any effective controls into what's going on the endpoint and within your data that's moving around your network. So when we look at classifications of data, we'll briefly go on about how we classify data. Normal traditional DLP solutions were very much a very huge consultative effort. You had to go out and find all your data, and once you'd found all that data, you then had to classify it and make a decision based around whether it was important enough, and then build your rules based around those aspects. But it was always a very cyclical and never-ending process, and lots of DLP solutions failed based around the fact that they were forever classifying, going out and trying to find all the data. Our solution is a little bit different than that, because what our agent does is it classifies data as a user or as an application touches it. And it will do that in three ways, which we'll come on to in a minute. But basically what the difference is, we are classifying and putting our rules and our controls based around fact, because we are an event-based solution rather than just a traditional policy-based solution. allowing you to kind of have more security around where your data is or isn't going. And that also kind of brings down the amount of time it takes from an engagement perspective. You can classify information pretty much as soon as the agent is installed on the endpoint based on pre-configured policies such as PII, very important, obviously, we're very focused around GDPR, PCI, all those types of things, but also very configurable as to what's important to you. So things based around specific locations, maybe of where sensitive data is known to reside, project names, etc., those types of things. So let's go on and talk about how we classify information. So we classify it in two ways, either transparently or manually. From a transparent perspective, we can base our classification based around the content, and that's all very well and good, providing you can actually see inside the data itself. So Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, PDFs, those types of things. Very easy to classify data because we can see and look inside that data and classify it based around the content of it, and very much a very traditional DLP function that the majority of solutions out there will do it. But what happens if you can't look inside the data? Well, we have the ability to classify data based around the context of it. And this is another reason why you get a very kind of short return on investment, if you like, when the solution is installed. And because that gives us the ability to say, for example, we know that anything that's going to be based on or in the file share for finance or on the server for development, we're going to say that everything within there is sensitive or confidential. So we can immediately say that anything coming from that location, we don't care whether it's a DLL file, a text document, a spreadsheet, a binary file, an executable, we're going to tag that information and say that that's just confidential. And then that allows us to put controls based around the location, if you like. We have over 200 different contextual parameters, so things like, you know, only specific computers can connect to specific locations. What is the network state of the machine that's connecting in? Are they sat in Starbucks at the moment, or are they connected to the corporate LAN? Are they emailing some information outside of the corporate domain, or are they trying to email it internally? Lots and lots of different contextual parameters which allow you to put controls, very effective controls, around where your users can send or what they can do with your data within itself. The third way, the manual way of us being able to classify data, is based on user classification. This is very popular within organizations which have very kind of structured classification structures for their data. An example of that would be governments and local governments and military types of organizations who have very kind of set in their ways of classifying data, and they can force a user, when they're creating data, when they're making documents, to choose one of those classification parts of the schema before they're allowed to save those documents on the wherever they're on their local drive or in their network shares, etc. So the two ways of classifying data, but three different types of the ways that we carry that out. So an example of the contextual classification or controls, if you like, of the solution is if we have an executive on a Windows machine and he accesses some customer data which is classified, and he attempts and copies it over to a USB drive. Now, because this is an executive, we can probably say that we can have a policy in place to say he's allowed to do that. But whilst he's allowed to do that, what we're going to do with that data is we're going to transparently encrypt it when it's put across onto that USB drive, and we're also going to warn him to say, to make him aware, if you like, of the fact that he has some classified information put across onto that USB drive. And again, should he lose that USB drive, not only do we have the knowledge of the fact that it's encrypted whilst it's on there, but we also know exactly what data is on there as well. On the flip side of that, if we have a contractor within our organization and he's working on a Mac and he's accessing some source code, if he attempts to move that up onto Dropbox, we can automatically stop and block that before it's even left the endpoint within itself. So your data remains at the endpoint. We're all about protecting data at the point of risk. And on top of that, we can kind of think that maybe this user maybe needs to monitor, so we can start maybe monitoring this user to see what other actions or interactions with data within itself that he's actually trying to carry out. When we look at the actual solution itself from an endpoint agent perspective, the agent has the core, or if you like, a part of the agent is visible, what we call data visibility and control. It operates across Windows, Mac, and Linux. It's very good within virtualized environments such as VMware, Citrix, those sort of things. But the core part of the agent is basically what gives you the visibility of what's going on the actual endpoint within itself. And coupled with what you can see here, the pink side of things, what we call DLP, based around what we're seeing and what's going on that on the endpoint for the data visibility control, allows you to start putting some controls around that and some prompts, so being able to block and stop data from leaving the organization. The third part of the agent is what we call the advanced threat protection. This is something that is very kind of, if you look at the layer, if you like, of where we're operating down at the kernel layer, it gives us the ability to see everything that goes on that endpoint, and therefore identify possible malware, possible people trying to steal data from being infiltrated into the network from things like websites or weaponized files coming in over email. But it allows us to see what's going on behind the scenes. If a user, for example, opens up a PDF file with a document in it that looks okay to the end user, but behind the scenes, if that's starting to try and open up network connections, fire up PowerShell, and make outbound connections to the internet to download droppers, because of where the agent's operating at, it's able to see and stop and block, or even just alert based upon those actions carried out. It's important to note as well here that all these are just licensable aspects that are input onto the management console, the DGMC. There's no need to redeploy agents; they're literally just turned on with the placement of a license key on the central console. Based around that, let's have a quick look at the actual product itself in action. This is an example of Digital Guardian working with its various different aspects of the content and classification. So here we have a user come onto their machine, they've logged in, and they've accessed some data from SharePoint, and they've downloaded it now onto their local machine. And we can see here that this actual information contains some credit card information and some possible PII or GDPR data with names, etc. on it. Now, if we attach this now to an email within itself, we can automatically see once the file is attached to the email. And it's important to note that we don't have anyone, we don't know where we're sending this information to at the moment. But the fact that the endpoint agent has seen an attached mail event has automatically brought up a prompt saying, this is sensitive information, and it may violate the policy. Please put a justification into why you need to email this out. Now, when the user then attempts to put in an email address, you can see here that we have two different P-whites in there. One is a Gmail account, and if we attempt to send that outside of the organization, we're automatically stopped and blocked from that perspective of being able to do that. And that's just because the user's maybe just made a mistake and put the wrong email address in there, and when he changes that and sends that out this time, so it's going internal to the domain, he's allowed to go and carry out that action, because that's a normal business as usual type of action that user would want to do to go about his daily job. Now, if this user actually wants to steal this information, though, then maybe they logged into their Gmail account themselves and actually try and attach that information to a web-based email. So here we have Gmail. We're automatically stopping and we're blocking that attachment from going out outside of the organization. So we can start going steps further than that and being able to control that data, because we're not limited just to being able to stop and block network transfer uploads. When we have sensitive information open on the desktop, again, we've got that kernel layer agent there, we're able the ability to turn off things like print screen while sensitive information is open on the desktop within itself. So we can't just do a print screen and then attach that file to our email within itself. We can look at copy and paste actions. We can start looking at things like being able to copy some information directly. So we're looking in the buffer now, we'll be able to see into the buffer, and then just pasting that into the email. And again, we can stop and we can block that from being carried out or being able to that. And all the time, this data has never left the endpoint. It all remains at that point of risk and being controlled. Now, regardless of what a user does to this data and how they manipulate it, the controls and the logging and that will all remain in place. Here we have the user now is going to encrypt it, and we're also going to zip it up. So now we're bypassing any content-based controls, so anything being able to look into that information to see what's inside it. It's also important to note we've made a copy of that as well. We've changed the name of it. We're even going to change the extension of it as well. So all these things are going on regardless of what's happening to this data. We're opening it now in a hex editor, and we're trying to remove any kind of mention of the fact that it may contain an Excel file. Regardless of how this user tries to manipulate this data, the controls and the tagging, if you like, remains in place, and therefore so does the control and the prevention of this user being able to steal this information. And here we go, have the user trying to attach that copied file, and again being stopped and being blocked from being able to carry out that action. So now when we look across now over onto from a reporting perspective on the management console, this is what we call our forensic report. So this is a little bit more detailed than would be normally in a normal kind of report that would be provided out to things like management. We can see the first two actions here of the user saving his file that he's downloaded from the SharePoint site. We see the full path of the sources and the destinations, and we also see the fact that now we know that this is classified information based around a policy. We see the action of the attach mail happening when the user tries to attach it, and all we've done at this point is we've just alerted the user to the fact that they're attaching sensitive information. We then see the red triangle indicating that an action was blocked, and then we can see there that the user has also now changed that destination address as being internally, and the information is being able to be sent out. Now when we look at the other actions of the user actually trying to steal the information, you can see that we see all the different aspects and all the different mechanisms or whatever that the user has tried to carry it out. Here we see the information being transferred across into a zip file. We see now that the source file name has been changed. We also see that it's now going out over, trying to be sent out over Google, and it's also interestingly being able to send out over port 443. So it's being attempted to be sent out over an encrypted link. And because again, where that our agent is the layer that our agent is operating at, we see the data before it enters that encrypted tunnel. So we still have that control, and we still have that ability to stop and block the action from being carried out. Also, when you look at this from an HR perspective, you also have steps, proven steps that a user is actually trying to manipulate data and trying to steal it and take it out of the organization. And all points have been stopped and blocked. And so you can now ask this user to justify his actions and maybe take further steps based around that. So that gives you an overview of how our endpoint agent classifies data, layers that it operates at, the levels of information that are available to you, and there are various steps and controls that can kind of give you the ability to control your data and protect it from leaving your organization. So I'll hand it back over to now if there's any questions around the solution in itself.
If anyone does have any questions, please do type them into the text box and I will put them to Stuart. Nope, it doesn't look like anything's coming through.
Okay, no problem.
Well, let me say thank you very much to Stuart for joining us. I hope you found that really useful. Obviously, we have got another webinar coming up next week, as well as all the other ones available online. So please do join us for that one. And if you do want any more details of the previous webinars, let me know. We went through a lot of information there, a lot of ways that the technology can help protect your data. If you would like to see it in any more detail, please get in touch with me. We can arrange to come and see you directly. But if I leave it for another few seconds, no questions coming through. All that's left is to say thank you very much, Stuart, for coming on and delivering the webinar. Thank you to everyone who attended, and have a good day.